Okay, first question. So, in your opinion, how would you best describe or define the core?
I think it's goes back from a probably definition. I don't know if you're familiar with Chris Doyle. He used to be a strength coach at the University of Iowa, and I was kind of starting out, and I liked this originally was any muscular tissue that connects the ribs to the hips. That was it, or ribs to pelvis. Whether it be the anterior, posterior side of the body.
So, is that including the muscles around the pelvis or just above the pelvis?
It'd be. I think it's the muscles above the pelvis, the muscles. So the abdominals, the rectus spinae, the transverse, the obliques, those type of muscles.
Nice. So then how would you best describe the function of the core in an athletic context? So I guess we can, because your background right now is NFL football players, so
Yeah.
kind of what's the function of the core for a football player?
This is kind of probably changed a little bit through time. Originally, going back to that same thought, I thought initially its role was like I don't know if I didn't mention this to you. I did a mentorship with Dr. Michael Yessis for a couple of years, and his were similar to what I originally learned too. Is that the function of the core is to do certain actions of the body, so trunk flexion, trunk lateral flexion, rotation, stability. Up till recently, though, I've done some courses with some functional neurologist type of people, and they look at it as more as the vestibular system triggering the erectors to stabilize the spine. And that's where I'm kind of going now, or a little more to the Franz Bosch type ideas of co-contraction around the spine. And so to help transfer energy from the lower body to the upper body, or to the opponent, or however it may be. So it's kind of transformed a little bit. It used to be more just actions. Now it's like more to maybe you're specific, and so you're targeted.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And that was from, who'd you learn that from, or where did you start to develop those ideas? Is it
the guy
with the 49ers?
It's actually, I did this course this last offseason with a guy. He's actually in the Toronto area, Matt Beal. M-A-T, and then last name B-O-U-L-E. I think he's at, I don't know what's his actual title. It's the IP Institute in Toronto. And it was a functionality course. So, and that was something that I trained the vestibular system, proprioception, tactile sensation, and stimulating the pathways from the brain to trigger erector tone.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Nice.
But that's kind of, I guess, and that's, I haven't found good ways to, even with the Bosch stuff, there's good ways to completely train that, but that's where I'm trying to maybe move to that direction.
Nice. Cool. So next question, do you currently prescribe any direct specific core exercises with your athletes?
Yeah, I still do some of the similar stuff I learned from Yestis, whether it be back extensions, hanging leg raise, oblique or lateral flexion type of stuff. That's currently how I program it. Is those really 4 categories: is rotation, extension, rotation, extension, lateral flexion, flexion. So 4 categories of trunk movement. So.
Nice. So that's a good kind of segue, because now I kind of want to talk about why you prefer those categories, and then kind of how you would program it, and then your rationale. So let's just start kind of at the top so why those 4 categories, and why do you see those as being, and why have you stuck with those, I guess, over the last few years in terms of programming?
When I typically program, say if you go through categories of movement, a squat pattern, hinge pattern, push pull, maybe a carry or a crawl, could be categories of movement. That just made sense to include the different planes of movement of the trunk. So, and also if you ever do single joint movements, whether it be elbow flexion, knee flexion, and then all the degrees of freedom of the hip, that in my eyes were the degrees of freedom of the trunk.
Okay.
or your knee has 2, your ankle and your hip might have 6, your trunk would have 4 degrees of, and then that would be the single, not single joint, but it'd be the single movement categories of the trunk.
And then you would have specific exercises in each of those categories to kind of train that.
Yep.
And then I guess what kind of training principles do you have in relation to training those 4 categories? For example, like does your prescription change in the off season, preseason, in season? Is it pretty consistent year round? Do you fluctuate it based on athlete needs? So yeah, I guess, so what kind of are your training principles around those 4 categories?
What I've traditionally done in the past is follow more of a kind of block sequence of the main lifts, and as well as in those trunk or core lifts. So you might go from give you an example, go from not a Russian twist, or like a sideline leg rotation, on your back where you rotate, and then you might move to a Russian twist. Then you might move to your feet for a med ball throw, and 2 different explosive patterns of med ball throws. So combining it with a ground-based movement. So it'd go from a very general to the movement to combining that into the more sport-specific pattern. And so it'd go from a very pretty much just like your training would sometimes with high volume, and working it down to a more specific explosive pattern, but still the same pattern of rotation. I'm not sure that made sense, but
in the same session?
No,
for sure.
Not in the same session, in a sequence over time. So through a period of months. So if I'm in a higher volume general phase, then it might be just doing rotational movements, where then as I move to the more specific special development exercises or explosive phase, it would move to maybe a lateral med ball toss, or a isodynamic med ball toss, but it would still be rotation of the trunk, but in that fashion, matching the theme of the block of training.
So then would it be more those specialized exercises in season?
Yes. Yep.
Compared to the off season, or is it?
Oh, you still there? Somebody just had a pop up.
Yep.
Okay, I lost my screen. There you go. All right, there you go. Yeah, gotcha. This is good. You're making me think deep about the area.
Well, I've had some really good interviews so far, because it seems like a lot of people, like especially you guys that have been in the industry quite a while, like you have pretty good answers, but then you can tell people are sitting and thinking because they haven't really had to think about the answers maybe as much as like sprint mechanics or the squat or something. And then even me writing out these questions, I'm like, shit, how would I even answer these questions? So
that's good.
It's good for me. But I think that's the interesting thing, and I'm going on a bit of a tangent, we can talk about it after, but like everyone I've had an interview with has at least a master's degree. And even with like that higher level education, like quite different answers across the board for a lot of things, which isn't good or bad. It's probably good that someone goes in and kind of analyzes these answers and tells people what people are thinking. So should be cool.
Yeah.
All right. So next question. Do you believe those direct and specific core exercises, so those 4 categories you were talking about, will transfer and improve athletic or sports performance?
I think the direct alone, not necessarily, but if you do move to the more specific, combining them with the ground base or the velocity of the actions, I think it will. So like say like a throwing athlete, where we might start with rotation, but then you might move to the more med ball rotational things, or like a track thrower. I think definitely.
So then I guess, so kind of the more general, I'm just figuring out how to say it back to you. So the more general exercises, I guess is the best way to say it, probably won't, but if the velocity or the timing is a bit more specific, that's going to transfer a little bit better in your opinion?
Yeah, I think your initial exercises are prepping the tissue, and just like any other area of the body, that you're prepping that tissue for tolerance or resilience, or even adding lean tissue there. And then as you add the pattern to it, the coordination to it, and that's where you'd have the transfer.
So then what if, and maybe let's talk about football players. What athletic abilities do you think those more specific exercises will transfer to best?
For football, is that what you said?
Or any athlete you've worked with, I guess, but
Yeah.
like, so you mentioned that the specific problem transfers better. So what kind of actual in-game abilities are you looking at it to transfer to?
I mean, for our probably most important position in the quarterback in football is the rotational aspects of the trunk, transferring from their push off from their lower body to their hand, and their ability to rotate from their hips and their shoulders. That's a big one for them. The ability to separate their hips and their shoulders, and they get a lot of that through those general trunk rotational exercises, just to open that range of motion up. For the rest of the players, it's primarily probably to maintain position during collision and contact. So their ability to hold position and absorb force, or at least maintain position while they're receiving force. And then the other one would be from a running and acceleration standpoint, be able to maintain and hold position. So more postural stuff while they're sprinting or accelerating would be the three main ones I would see in football. So the protection from collision, tackling, absorbing and producing force, sprinting and accelerating, and then the quarterback, the specialty type of skill patterns from the thrower and a kicker, like field goal kicker and punter.
Nice. So we talked about so just to kind of probe those answers a little bit more. So we talked about kind of some of your rotational exercises, I guess.
Yeah.
What about for those other two athletic qualities, the stability and contact, and then the running mechanics? What kind of direct or specific core exercises would you be looking at for those aspects?
I think for your contact ones, depending if it's from the front, I think anything your flexion type of exercises, building that initially through the general means, but then eventually might be my more isometric holds or something where you're holding tension at higher loads. Mm-hmm. And then running in general, there are rotational aspects of the shoulders and hips and running through gait. So I think that those type of things, those patterns, eventually you can, whether it be like the Bosch water bag, a rotation with the water bag, trying to get the co-contraction in the torso, so stabilizing the spine while your shoulders and your hips are moving. So those would be this more specific pattern for those patterns, I think.
So then kind of a second question off of that, do you believe those direct and specific core exercises work better than more traditional forms of training? So barbell resistance training, Olympic lifting, sprinting, jumping, for improving those athletic abilities?
I think that obviously I think there's been studies that show there's a lot of activity going on, and those muscles are in like a heavy squat. I don't know, though, in my mind, I don't know how much different fancy words, but outside perturbation or how robust those patterns are in team sports when the environment's a lot more chaotic. Mm-hmm. So I do think the more specific variations of those do make that area a little more tolerable to the demands it'll see versus a traditional squat. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah. Good answer. No one said anything like that yet. So. So again, just to kind of summarize, make sure I'm not putting words in your mouth. You think more of those special or specific kind of core exercises would add a different layer that traditional forms of training probably wouldn't.
Yes.
With the sensory kind of input and stuff like that. Yeah.
Whether that be through like your instability from above type of stuff that Bosch does, or a water bag above head, or a dowel above head, challenging, taking your arms out of the running action, challenging the torso, the spine to stabilize while the legs are moving. I think those we use some of those, and I think they're been very valuable for teaching even mechanics and posture. So, and it is working in those areas at the same time.
Nice. All right, so next question. Similar idea though. Do you believe direct core training, so direct and specific core training, can decrease the chance for future sports injuries?
Yeah, I think if you at least decrease, trying to get like just from probably soft tissue and maybe an indirect contact injury, yeah, or at least decrease the severity of it. True direct contact, I'm not sure. And that's things we've been studying right now, whether it be like a high ankle sprain and direct contact to the ankle if the guy rolled into him. We could probably maybe help the severity, but like to truly prevent it, I'm not sure. So in American football, like a lot, in those areas, we would maybe see some like your pelvic core injuries. Like that might be one you might see, which is still pretty rare in football. We would see more like low back injuries from taking on a collision. I guess I would hope that training that tissue, preparing that tissue would make it a little more resilient. I'm not sure if it'll prevent it though. We have some hernias in football, but not a ton. That's a pretty rare one. We do have some like adductor strains, so depending on how far you define the core down, that could potentially be a part of it too.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess a way you can look at it too is if you can't, like the inability to maybe control the pelvis from anterior posterior toe might cause issues with the hamstrings, might cause issues other areas as well.
Yes. So then question off of that is, do you believe direct and specific core training works better than traditional forms of training for decreasing injury risk?
I would say, I'm gonna say this like it depends. I think the combination of the two is probably your best bet, because I think some of the flaws of the director specific is that you obviously can't load them as much because they're more specific. The velocities are different. It's very hard to load the patterns. So I think there's value in your general training and loading the patterns to achieve forces and lean mass gains and all those sort of things that you want to get from those lifts. But I think the direct and specific help transfer that into more coordinated patterns. So I don't know if I'd say one or the other, because I would say I don't know if I've seen people train in one or the other, but I think the combination is probably the better world to live in.
Yes. All right, next question. Does direct or specific core training offer any unique benefits over other forms of training?
I think your direct specific or specific, I think more specific, provide a little more, they're a little more challenging in the coordination area. They're a little more skill based. They're a little more challenging that way for our guys. The direct though, the other thing I was thinking about, the direct training, it does provide you a chance to target the area more than if you're loading a squat or loading a deadlift. Those are in use, but if different range of motions in those areas are needed, that you definitely can target those more.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I don't know. I'm trying to think what else to go with that. But
so in your opinion, is there ever a situation where directly training the core could have a negative effect? So either on performance or in relation to injury risk?
not that I've seen, I guess. No.
No.
Well, I mean, if you want to try to get that. Yeah, I mean, I've heard people say in the past, I don't know if I've never seen it to be true, too much flexion and it could change your posture or, but I've never seen that be the case, I guess. So I don't know, but, or like, so.
Nice. All right, couple more questions.
Okay.
Do you ever assess the core in your training programs?
Never had. No.
No.
I mean, we've done different places I've been. They've done, what's different ones? I mean, I've done different FMS variations at different places that I've guys or different people I've worked for. So if you consider like the rotary stability test a core assessment, then I've been at one place that what's the McGill crunch test or something like that, but we've never.
Yeah.
It was more of a. I don't think it was a full team-wide testing. It was more of individual cases of guys that had some type of issue, and they assessed it. But from a team standpoint, no. We've done the groin squeeze at places. We've done like an active straight leg at places. From a small area, we use Kanga Tech here, which is like a full hip assessment. So all the hip actions. So we use Nord boards here. All it hits is hamstring. So that's nothing from a direct area now.
Oh, cool. So I guess so no objective testing. Do you do any kind of, because most coaches I've talked to, it's a lot of subjective assessments, I guess. So watching athletes for different deficits in core function, I guess. So watching the pelvis or the low back. Is there any of that you kind of focus on in your coaching hands-on with athletes?
We do we will it'll be more this year too than we've done in the past is looking at the primary archetypes of movement. So the squat pattern. So we will look at those general patterns that we train: squat, hinge, single leg movements. Now that'll be part of those assessments, but it won't be, like I said, it won't be direct. We also do some with the running mechanics, and that's more like your Altus kinegram type of stuff. So we might see it in a stance phase or in a toe off. We'll look at things like that. So those are, but I don't know if we would grade it directly at the core though. It's more like postural, like a hip tip to shoulder alignment. What angle's that at? Hip to knee alignment. So those type of things. I don't know if it's quite evaluated as through a core only. Same with the squat patterns as well. So.
Mm-hmm. Nice. So maybe this is getting a bit too hypothetical of a question, but if you noticed an athlete, whether it's during the running mechanics or you see something funky in posture during a squat, would that change your exercise prescription with specific core exercises, or would you do something else to kind of change the posture or the mechanics, or if that question makes sense?
Yeah. Like the one that comes to my mind is a guy like we have a lot of athletes that have a really anterior tilted pelvis. So those would maybe the guys that we maybe would do some of that correction with. Now choosing what exercise it'd be at, that's I'm not sure. Would that be a hip flexion type of lower ab flexion type? I don't know. That's or a diaphragmatic breathing type of movement. I don't know. That's I'd have to think about that one more, because normally maybe we would actually correct it through. Maybe it'd be like a hip mobility issue or I don't know, tie the core in there or think about the core that way, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But
just see if there's anything else on that question. So I guess just to summarize, no real objective or subjective assessments of the core directly for core function?
No.
Do you know if the medical side does at all, like in pre-season testing or medical testing?
I do not think we do. I think it's we have some guys that have similar background in let me think of the name of it, PRI, posture restoration, but that's more like they do more pelvic positioning, like they posterior tilt, then breathing exercises, but I'm not sure if there's like a measurable exercise they do with that though. We also have in-house, we have an Egoscue area. Not sure if you're familiar with that. It's like a still shot pictures of the postural, and then again, exercise. It's more like static holds or stretches that correct postural issues, but I'm not sure if they have any direct core evaluators other than pelvis or hip shift or height, or from the side rotation. But I don't think it's corrected through anything from a core training standpoint. It's more static static iso holds or stretches.
Yeah.
So.
All right, last real question, I guess.
Okay.
So and we're talking about it a little bit, so I guess just a bit more detail. How did you develop your philosophy around training the core?
Initially, it was from people I interned with or learned from, to direct supervisors that I was initially working for. And then recently, the ones I mentioned on the vestibular system stuff has been further education that I've tried to do on my own, that I've came across people that have kind of a different mindset. And then like the Bosch stuff has been books I bought on my own that I've tried that have kind of led me in that direction.
Nice.
But no, as far as something from learning from an education standpoint or college or anything, I don't know if we covered anything in that area. So
yeah, no, probably not.
So
so a lot of kind of like practical experience, and then just self-learning and stuff like that.
Yep.
And then what's kind of your take on the current scientific evidence in relation to core training?
It seems mixed. I mean, obviously, like when we do our NFL education stuff at the NFL Combine, they'll bring speakers in and they'll bring McGill in, and so that's like, as far as that area, that's been like the only authoritative person. Like then you have your PRI people that work with people, and so there's different, like, I don't even know what to call them, like not trends, but there's different new groupings of focused areas on those type of things that tend to take off in American sports, and that people kind of follow, whether that be RPR or that be things like that they expand and then they grow. But nobody, I guess there's not really a governing person over top to say that that's right or wrong, or like a applied kinesiology or like things like that you might study on your own or do. So
Nice.
So I would say there's not a person that kind of mediates that and says it's right or wrong, and maybe that's the problem.
And I don't even know if you could have a person like that.
Yeah.
Such a massive topic.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. So I guess the last question would be, is there anything you feel we kind of haven't talked about in relation to the core training that you might think is important to chat about, or are there any other thoughts that you kind of wanted to come back to or anything?
No, I mean, that's the thing I think I've been, like I mentioned, I've been exploring is a lot of the stuff of the like functional neurology, the neurology type of stuff. That stuff's been really intriguing to me lately, of how the body develops from a child up, whatever. I think there's another group called original strength, or OS, reflexive type of strength type of stuff, is how those areas are developed through crawling patterns or gait that maybe we have neglected, and the direct training maybe doesn't even touch or connect with the brain too. That stuff's been really interesting to me to try to explore that area more. To give a little bit more meaning to the movement instead of just training the tissue only.
Yeah, for sure.
So
nice.
But other than that, not that I can think of.
Perfect. So I'll just stop the recording.
Okay.